After a decade of building these handmade custom jewelry boxes, I decided to take a dive into building the more cost-friendly projects like household items, and I haven't looked back. To be fair, I still build those jewelry boxes, but I never realized how much money you could make building smalls. So today, I'm going to show you how to build 3 different smalls that you need to add to your lineup. Let's go. We're going to start off today's video with this awesome candle holder for our first project. For this particular project, I've got some 1x4 cedar. Run up to your big box store and grab the 1x4 of your liking. We'll start by getting 2 pieces cut to 1 3/4 inches. After we get those cut, we'll cut one at 3 inches, one at 3.5 inches, and one at 4 inches. On the top of our 3.5 inch piece, we'll mark the center, punch that mark, bring that over to the vise, and I'm going to be drilling down about 1/2 inch with 1.5 inch Forstner bit. On our 3 inch piece and our 4 inch piece from the bottom, we're going to pull up to 1 1/4. Now on the opposite side of our 4 inch piece from the top down, we'll pull 3/4 and 2 inches. We'll grab our 2 3/4 pieces and our 1 3.5 inch piece and add a dab of glue, 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 add a dab of glue. And we're gonna pop a Brad in his ass. We'll take our 2 3/4 pieces first and get those nailed at those marks we made, right on the front of our 4 inch piece. Now we'll nail the 3.5 inch piece at those 1.25 inch marks we made. If you want to take this a step further, you could use some dowels or even some dominoes to fasten everything. And your piece should start to take shape like this. Now with the remaining piece of cedar that I have left over, I'm going to pull over to 10 inches and get this cut over at the miter saw. Once you get that 10 inch piece cut, bring it back to your table saw, and I'm going to get mine ripped to 3/4 inch. That way I have a piece of stock that's 3/4 by 3/4. I'll take that back to my miter saw and turn my miter saw to 45 degrees. I'll make a cut right at the center of my 3/4 inch piece, spin it around and make my second cut at that center mark, making sort of a pyramid. I'll do that on both ends of this 10 inch piece. I'll pull down about 1 inch and cut that off square on both sides. And that will be the ears for this candle holder. Next, I'll turn my miter to 60 degrees and do the same steps, cutting both 60s right at the center of the end of this piece. I'll pull down 1 inch again, turn back to 0 degrees, and cut that square. I'll install my tail with the pyramid going parallel with the length of the body, and my ears the opposite direction. I'll come 1/4 inch in from either side, add a dab of glue, give it a little rub joint, and help it stiffen up a bit. Add a dab of glue. It is an end grain to end grain glue joint, so if you want, you can pop a Brad in his ass. With one 1x4x8, I can get 7 of these built. If you're worried about these catching fire, just use a fire retardant finish. They make them in all sorts of different brands. However, I don't think you got to worry about these things catching fire. We've been through this before on my channel. But if you are concerned about this wood catching fire, use a battery tea light candle, huh? After you do a little bit of math at 20 to 25 a pop, times that by 7, you're at least 140 bucks out of that one 1x4. For project number 2, we're going to be building another beginner-friendly project that does extremely well for me at my shop and my local markets. And that is this napkin holder. Let's go. For this project, you're going to need some 3/4 inch stock, one piece that's at least 8 inches in length by about 8 inches wide, and another piece that's at least 8 inches wide by about 2 inches in width by 3/4 inch thick, along with at least 12 inches worth of a 5/8 inch dowel. For the base, I'm going to be using this piece of walnut, and for the top piece, I'm going to use this piece of figured myrtle. The reason I'm using this myrtle is it's heavy enough to where it'll hold those napkins in place. I'll start by getting my base ripped down to a width of 7 1/4. Next, I'll get my top piece ripped to a width at 2 inches. Next, I'll get my base length cut to 8 inches. And I'll get my 2-inch rip cut to 8 inches as well. Now I'll pull in from both ends of my 2-inch rip near the center of the board to 5/8 of an inch. Then I'll mark the center of the width right at those 5/8 inch marks. I'll punch those holes, bring that piece to my drill press, and I'm going to be installing a 7/8 inch Forstner bit, and I'll drill all the way through at those punch marks. Now, I'll mark the center of the width on the very end of my 2-inch rip on both sides, and I'll mark the center of the width of my base. I'll line up those center marks, and I'll use that same 7/8 inch Forstner bit and stick it right through that first hole I drilled on my 2-inch piece and just give it a nice little tap on both sides. And that gives me the perfect layout for my next holes. Now I'll take my hand drill and install a 5/8 inch Forstner bit, and I'm going to drill these holes a 1/2 inch deep. After I do that, before we do anything else, I'm going to add some chamfers to my holes on both of my pieces and along the edges of my base and on one edge of my 2-inch rip as well, adding some much needed depth to this piece. I went ahead and got 2 pieces of my dowel stock cut to 4 1/2 inches in length, and we'll add a dab of glue. Check those for plumb both ways. And we'll give those a few minutes to dry. Once that glue dries, I'll hit it with the finish for dummies. Shalakalaka. And before we move on, I've got a favor to ask. Head down below and smack that thumbs up button and hit subscribe and smack that bell so you're notified for weekly woodworking content. It's absolutely free and it really does help. For project number 3, you're going to need at least 3 foot worth of a 2x6 and about 6 inches of a 1x6. and at least 10 inches of a 1¼ inch dowel. I'll be using some of this yellow pine that I picked up from my big box store. I'll start by measuring over to 12½ inches and getting this cut at the miter saw. This will be our base. After that, I'll get one cut at 14 inches. And this will be our upright with the handle. Next, I'll get a piece of my 1x cut to 4½ inches in length. Then I'll be getting both my 14-inch piece and my 4½ inch piece ripped down to 4½ inches. Off camera, I went ahead and resawed this piece to 1¼ inch. I thought it was a little bit too bulky. This is optional. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. No worries. From the top of our upright, I'll pull down to 1½ inch. At those 1½ inch marks, I'm going to pull in from both sides to 1 inch. And I'll punch those marks. I'll take that piece over to the drill press, and with an 1¼ inch Forstner bit, I'll be drilling all the way through at those punch marks. At the top and the bottom of those circles, I'll connect each one together. And I'll get that removed with my jigsaw. Now I'll mark the center of my base. At that center mark, I'll pull in at 1½ inch from both sides. And I'll be pre-drilling all the way through at those marks. And I'll be using some 2½ inch T15 stainless steel screws because this is going to be outside. I'll make a pilot hole with those screws and then just back those right back out. I'll take my upright and add a dab of glue. And I'll add a couple dabs of CA glue to help act as a temporary clamp. And then I'll install these T15 2½ inch stainless steel trim screws. I'll make sure that I'm lined up with my pre-drill marks, and I want to be 1/2 inch in from either side of my base. I'll make sure that I'm nice and square and have even spacing and hold that snug. We'll give that a few minutes to dry, and I'll meet you back here. Once that glue's dry enough, go ahead and install your 2 screws. Next, we'll go ahead and get our 3/4 inch stock installed. And from the very edge, I'll pull over to 1 1/8 inches. And at the bottom, I'll pull in at 5/8 inch. At the 5/8 inch mark, I'll pull over from both sides at 1½ inch. And we'll do those same steps that we did for our upright for our 3/4 inch piece. Add a dab of glue. You want to make sure that you have the same 1/2 inch spacing from either side. And we'll get those screws installed. Now for our dowel rod, I'll pull in from the right side at 2 3/4 and mark the center. And I'll do that on both the top side and the bottom side. And I'll drill a pilot hole once again. And we'll add a dab of glue and add a dab of CA glue and line that up with that center mark we made up top. Hold down pressure for a few seconds, and once you feel confident that that's dry enough, go ahead and add your last screw. Voila! Now I am aiming for rustic, so we're going to give this thing some boogie. So sugar boogie. All right, I gave that thing a good little while to cool off because that thing was hot. I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with this Scotch-Brite pad. We gotta find a different way to do that. A little better. You definitely want to wear a mask when doing this. This stuff is super fine and super bad for you. Well, gang, there you have it. 3 beginner-friendly projects that every beginner should be adding to their lineup of woodworking projects to sell. I really hope that you drew some inspiration from today's video, because now it is indeed your turn to get in the shop and make some sawdust. Scotty.